Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I am Joe Devine and today I'm joined by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe.
Hello, how's it going?
It's going very, very well.
It's New Year's Eve.
Sort of is.
It is for people listening on the day of release.
I tell you what, just before we started recording, I spilled coffee on my face. So is there any evidence of that now? I just don't want to become like some awful man.
I don't think so, but you always look a bit stained, you know.
I've had a couple of days of football travel.
Yeah.
So
if you didn't look like you had coffee on your face after that,
okay.
something would have gone wrong.
Maybe it would have been better just, to make it seem like that was a sort of a, that my appearance was the result of some kind of accident.
Right. Or a birthmark.
Not like an industrial accident, but like the accident,
Sure.
a spilled coffee on yourself kind of accident.
An accident with tractors. Yeah.
No, I mean...
Hey, listen, today's episode, we are going to go over a couple of videos that we've made recently, namely Leicester's defence, Mourinho's Tottenham, and also we're going to talk about VAR. Seb and I spoke about that before the season began to explain the system as best we could, and we're going to revisit it now to discuss what's happened so far and how boring that is. And also, we're going to talk about the last video we did in collaboration with The Athletic, which was about Adam Crafton's signings of the decade. We're going to talk about those, talk about what our signings of the decade might be, and also just talk about the decade, and then other stuff about the decade, and then we're going to say about the decade, what our favourite videos of the decade were.
We're probably going to cut a few of those decades.
I was going to add
a few of those out.
And, anyway.
It's like you're selling a product.
It's about the decade. Well, it's the beginning. I'm trying to get them to stick around and listen to everything that's just happened over the last decade. We're not really going to do much of that, but there will be discussion of the decade throughout the rest of the podcast. Anyway, before we get started, I'd love to say that we are delighted to be supported by, I'd probably say, the greatest football writing adventure of the decade, The Athletic. Is that fair to say? The best place to read about football. It's the most exciting for me, and I would imagine many of you listening. Anyway, you can visit theathletic.co.uk/Tifo, get a 7-day free trial, and get 50% off an annual subscription. Do you know how much that works out to be per day, Seb?
I feel like I do because we've done this bit a few times, but it's something like 20p or something.
It's 8p.
It's 8p, okay.
Yeah. I've just put the 8p day song in there. It's a good song. Have you listened to that one yet?
I haven't, no.
It's good. You should listen to the episode.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks to The Athletic, and we will start now. Leicester's defence is the first place we're starting at. We released this video a week or two ago now, written by Alex Stewart, who, it's fair to say, was quite taken with the way that Leicester have been playing. Would you give a very short and brief summary of some of the things that he was saying, and then take it into where you want to take it to? Because I know you're saying that perhaps when they face top 6 opponents, these things may change slightly. We've just seen that past weekend with Manchester City.
Yeah, so Alex is right to be taken with them. They're very, very impressive, and prior to the weekend, they were the owners of the best defensive record in the Premier League. I think a couple of the themes that he picked out were particularly interesting. So the way they counter-attack is the obvious one. The way Brendan Rodgers is using Jamie Vardy in a slightly more narrow way. And
that guy.
What, Alex Stewart or Jamie Vardy?
Jamie Vardy.
Okay.
That goal he scored against City at the weekend.
Do you remember a Ruud van Nistelrooy goal at Highbury in about 2003?
No.
Yeah.
Was it the same goal?
Very, very similar in the sense that Jamie Vardy picks up a Harvey Barnes pass in sort of a shallow position just inside the City half, and he races into the box. And like Van Nistelrooy 15, 16 years earlier, it looks like he takes one too many touches.
Yeah.
And it looks like he's denied himself a scoring angle. But the finish he produces just brilliant, as Van Nistelrooy's was.
I would say of Jamie Vardy at the moment, I can't think of another player who screams more whenever he gets the ball. I'm going to score. I'm going to score now. And you watch him and you're just so confident. I'm so sorry. Can you talk?
So I think, I'm going to guess at what you were about to say. And I think one of the things, I was at Leicester's game on Saturday night at Manchester City, and one of the interesting things about Vardy is that he plays within a very sort of narrow parameter, because he does the same things. He scores goals in the same way, season in, season out. And also he relies on a very narrow set of attributes. So, his pace, his ability to run at defenders. He doesn't have a lot of tricks. So he isn't beating players with any technical anything. He really just knocks the ball into space and runs after it.
He's blazing past them.
Yeah, he is. And what's really, really interesting is still, this is, I think it's his 5th season in the Premier League, and still nobody has an answer to that. On Saturday night, he scored his excellent goal, but also a couple of minutes later, Harvey Barnes produces arguably the pass of the game, to carve the ball pretty much into the same position as he did for the goal. And Vardy did exactly the same thing. Roasted a couple of defenders. Neither Fernandinho or Nicolas Otamendi really knew what to do with him. And he didn't end up scoring. He ripped a shot just over Edison's crossbar. But same principle. And I think what's interesting is Rodgers has worked that out, and he knows this is how you use Vardy. Until someone comes up with a way of nullifying this as a tactic, we're going to just keep doing it. And so it's interesting. One of the things that Alex picks out in his video, in his script, was that is what Leicester try and do. Almost every time they retrieve the ball, is the first look is for where Vardy is and where the space is. And if the player recovering the ball hasn't got the pass to put him into that situation, then it's to someone that does, ideally a Barnes, a Maddison, either of the fullbacks actually, because Chilwell's delivery is very, very good. Pereira is a very, very good footballer. Even holding players, someone like Ndidi is nominally a restricting footballer, but he's also technically a very good one too. So
also, if there's a lot of space and you're just knocking the ball into it for Vardy to chase, you don't. As I said, Leicester have a lot of great passes of the ball. Mm-hmm. You don't actually need to be that technically gifted to put a good ball in for Vardy.
No, you don't.
Particularly if the opposition are playing such a high line.
No, because the margin of error is actually quite big.
Yeah.
Because particularly if you're playing against theoretically, if you're playing away from home, then generally, with a few exceptions, most of those teams will play with quite a high defensive line. It's quite rare to see a side sit deep in their own half in their own stadium. So for someone like Vardy, as long as he keeps himself on side, that generally means that you've got not necessarily big amounts of space in the centre of the pitch, but certainly down in the channels. One of the things that one of the other things that Alex pointed out was how whilst Rodgers plays with really I suppose you describe Leicester as a 4-1-4-1, with Ndidi as that one sitting behind and sitting in front and screening that defence, but then the four sort of artisans, the ball players in front of him, collapsing in to sort of provide the stability and the protection. Now, one of the things that disappointed me on Saturday was that they didn't really do that. It was chaos. And the first time, we've been impressed by Leicester for quite a long time. First time I had doubts was right at the beginning of the season when they went to Stamford Bridge, when they were bad. They invited Chelsea into the game. They didn't really start playing until about an hour into it. And as a result, they really wasted the opportunity to win against a side. Frank Lampard's Chelsea have improved, accept that. But back then, they were very embryonic.
They lost 4-0 to Manchester United.
They lost 4-0 to Manchester United. And also, if you look at some of the other results, they've lost at home to West Ham and Bournemouth. No. Good teams don't do that. So they were vulnerable, and I think Leicester are better. And Chelsea, that day at least, were there for the taking. Unfortunately, Leicester have this thing whereby when they go into a specific type of contest, their systems seem to disintegrate. So an interesting exercise for anyone who hasn't seen Alex's video would be to rewatch it now and take note of everything he says, which is absolutely correct, but then to compare it to what happened on Saturday night. So, for instance, not just the goals that City scored, Manchester City scored, but some of the chances they conceded and some of the ways in which those chances were created. So I would look at, for instance, the amount of space Kevin De Bruyne had throughout the game. If you think about what De Bruyne is, probably, I know it's arguable, but for me, probably the best and most dangerous attacking midfielder in the country. Who is the player in the days prior to that kind of game that you would plan to take away? Who is the one that you would guard against? It's probably De Bruyne. City, it's a little bit of a pick your poison. They're a sort of murderer's row type of football team. I accept that. But De Bruyne is the one who you say, right, well, if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to beat somebody else. It's like Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls back in the day. And yet Leicester didn't do that. And they didn't do that because their midfield players, specifically Maddison, I say I know he's a bit of an easy target, but you don't see those players. Digging in is a bit of a trite phrase, but that's still appropriate. You don't see the kind of you don't see them doing the uglier parts of the game in those kind of matches, and it's odd. I mean, I don't really like to kind of dismiss things or describe them as sort of intangibles within games, because that's a little bit of a cop-out. It's a way of explaining something without actually explaining it. But it seems to be fundamentally a mentality issue. All the things that Leicester do well vanish when they play against good sides. It's not even good sides, actually, it's big teams. Manchester United are nobody's idea of a good side, and yet Leicester were dreadful at Old Trafford when they played. Manchester City won, what looked like at the time a season-changing game, 1-0 with a penalty. But Leicester made no impression on that game whatsoever. Ditto at Stamford Bridge, and apart from those good first half moments at the Etihad, and one chance for Harvey Barnes in the second, which he actually got injured as a result of, they did themselves a big disservice.
How many of their first team is still around from the 2016 Champions season? Because I remember Alex says at the beginning of the video that the defence is completely changed.
Other than Kasper Schmeichel, yes. So
we have Vardy, obviously,
and Schmeichel, and I mean, there are still players like Mark Albrighton at the club, and Demarai Gray is at the club. But I first of all, like, Demarai Gray was not a pivotal player in the Championship winning side, and Albrighton is not a pivotal player now. So So it could, I suppose one of the things that people say often about Championship winning teams is that they have a Championship mentality, in that they've done this for the last few seasons. They know how it works. They know about the grind when you get to this stage of the season. That was one of the miraculous things about Leicester winning the Premier League when they did, was because none of their players had achieved that before. So it was, it was an incredible feat of solidarity to maintain that towards the end of the season. It's an interesting idea that there is a different mentality which comes across them. You would have thought, as you say, no one considers Manchester United a good club at the moment, good team. Sorry, yeah.
But they're of course a big club. How does that manifest? Do you think? I mean, we're speculating, but how does that manifest in the mind of a Leicester City player?
I mean, how it manifests in the mind is a very difficult question to answer. What I noticed, sort of a few observations that we're going to overanalyze, is that in the opening minutes of that game, what you saw was not a Leicester team that immediately straight onto the pitch and wanted to play as they have been instructed to do. I mean, it was the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes of that game was full of Leicester players doing sort of calm down gestures to each other. They wanted the ball. They just wanted to have the ball, not necessarily do anything with it. They wanted to settle into the game. And almost, I don't know if this is the right way of describing it, but it seems as if they wanted to feel like they belonged before they started playing.
They wanted to dip their toe into the bath and go slowly in.
A little bit. It was like they brought an inferiority into the game, and they were waiting for it to vanish before starting to play as we know they can. It was interesting also that, yes, wonderful pass from Harvey Barnes, but Vardy provided that moment. Vardy provided the moment where you think, right, we've got 1-0 lead here. Now, Leicester want really, with the players at their disposal, to play on the counter-attack in that situation. It was set up perfectly for them, and you could hear the stadium become more anxious. Vardy scored, and the Etihad has become one of those places where people buy tickets and they expect to win. And when it doesn't happen, it's not that they boo or get upset. It's that just they don't really know how to react sometimes. Not everyone. There's a lot of people there that aren't like that, but that became the mood. And then Vardy had his second chance, and you could hear the anxiety rippling up the tears again around the press box, because that's sort of bedded into the fans at the Etihad. And it was strange. And so you think this is a situation where Leicester can capitalise, and they didn't have the mentality to do that. And that's mentality is something we speak about a lot, and probably a bit too much. Again, one of those sort of soft justifications for things, but that's still how it felt. And yeah, it was so disappointing.
Well, talk to me about they're going to finish in the top 4, right?
For me, yes, I think so.
You would have thought so, yes. Particularly given how inconsistent Tottenham and Manchester United seem to be.
Here's the thing, Joe. I think Leicester are comfortably the second best team in the country. I think on paper Manchester City are, because of the resources, but I think City are disengaged. I think it's an open secret that Pep Guardiola is prioritising the Champions League. I think that attitude, if it's not shared by the players, has bled into their application too. So yes, of course. And I fully expect, as soon as they face a run of games where I haven't got the fixture list in front of me, but if they had 5 teams from outside the top 4 to play next, I expect they'd win all of them.
So they could finish second.
They could finish second. I'd be amazed if they didn't finish in the top 4.
It's a quite incredible achievement, really, isn't it? And I remember, I'm blanking on the name of their owner who sadly passed away.
Yeah, Vishai. Yeah,
Vishai Srivadhanaprabha. But he said when he bought Leicester that over the next 5 to 10 years, I want to turn Leicester into a top 4 Champions League football side. When he said that, it was absurd.
People mocked him for it.
It was ridiculous. Yep. And obviously, to try and understand the different contributing factors that have gone into this situation, not only from Leicester, also the poor performances of other clubs as well. Not that I want to take it away from them, but
it's relevant though. It is relevant.
It's stunning that is the case. You don't often find owners coming into clubs who are in the position that Leicester were in and saying outlandish things like that. Maybe it's a little bit of confirmation bias, but
no, I think it's very fair.
It's a stunning achievement, isn't it?
It is. Also, I think we shouldn't portray. I know what I've just said about other teams underperforming, but I think one thing that's really important to recognise is just how astute their appointment of Rodgers was, because as we've seen in the last couple of weeks in the Premier League, there are a lot of clubs that just pick a manager. They want a guy. They've seen what he's achieved. I would say that Everton have just done that with Carlo Ancelotti. Happy to be proved wrong, but I'd say what they've done is they've thought, right, let's go and find the most decorated coach on the market and point him. What Leicester did was they recognised what they had. They recognised the demographics within their squad, which was a couple of veteran players, but mainly this core group of young, pliable footballers. And they found someone who, is known to coach an attractive form of the game and had a lot of, some success at Liverpool. But they also found someone that historically has worked really well with young players. Like Brendan Rodgers has a little bit of a bad reputation in England because people poke fun at his personality. And that's understandable. He's had to adjust that a little bit. He's wound it in a little bit. Maybe we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But
his Brentisms.
He's wound that in. I was in one of his press conferences, obviously, at the weekend, and he's trying very hard not to be that character. But what Leicester did is say, look, we have a Tielemans, we have a Maddison, we have an Ndidi, we have a Chilwell, we have players, and we have a Harvey Barnes. Now, they react well to that kind of person. Brendan Rodgers is known to be positive. He extracts a lot out of young players. That's what he did at Liverpool. If you think about what Raheem Sterling became under him at Liverpool, for instance. So this is really no surprise. And so they deserve a great deal of credit for identifying a potential synergy and then getting it to work and manifest in this form. So in a way, they are a beneficiary of teams like Arsenal, Tottenham, Manchester United being far less than what they should be and underperforming pretty dramatically. But at the same time, they are also, this is hard-earned success as well. And it's a lot of decisions have been got right. And unfortunately in football, despite all the money, despite all the people employed to get decisions right, that's quite an unusual thing to say.
Hopefully Leicester can serve as an example to everyone else then.
I hope so. I don't expect they will do. It will still be sort of people throwing money at the wall and hoping a bit of it sticks. But,
Jose Mourinho is a Tottenham manager now. We've talked about this several times, but since then, you've seen Tottenham live a couple of times. You've been to the press conferences. There's been a couple of negative results. How's it all going? I'm a Tottenham fan, so I don't have my writer's hat on with this. It's a very cold sort of experience. I was at Molineux for the Tottenham's win over Wolves, and that was a very literally cold experience. That was a terrible day out. And they won that game despite being pretty much dreadful for most of it and being torn apart by Adama Traore. And I was at White Hart Lane, or the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Is that what it's called now?
Yeah.
The Tottenham Hotspur Stadium?
It's awaiting a naming right still. So it will be
with
something
who?
else.
Do we know?
We don't know yet, but it will be, I'm sure it will be the
Cadbury
Starbucks
Stadium.
Dome in
Starbucks Dome,
the in the future.
the Hoover Arena.
Yeah.
That would be good, wouldn't it? The Hoover Arena,
the Amazon Bowl. I don't know. And it was as bad a Tottenham performance as I've seen for a really long time. There's a couple of we haven't done this with me yet, but I've obviously paid attention to the kind of to what we've done as a.
What are you saying? That's a very confusing sentence.
Well, because
you haven't been on the podcast to talk about Tottenham.
No, because I listened to the podcast obviously with Jack and Charlie.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that they said about how this came about were absolutely right. And I also before I came in this morning, I watched Alex's video about how Spurs have changed under Mourinho, and I agreed with all of it. There's some very astute points. All I would say is, as a fan, it's a slightly different experience. So I wrote an article for Football 365 about this when it happened, and my point then was that when Jose Mourinho comes to your club, it stops being about your club. It's about him. Now, there's I don't know whether they're in short supply at the moment because of what happened against Chelsea, but I would say that these are people who are happy to be satiated, who are happy to tolerate Mourinho and his Mourinho-isms for the sake of a League Cup or an FA Cup. Now, my point would be that winning with Jose Mourinho is diluted by the fact that success becomes his possession and a tool by which his career is rejuvenated. Now, as a Tottenham fan, that's quite a compromise to have to make because...
Can I just add something to that?
Of course you can.
I would add that a victory, a trophy for a Mourinho football club is no longer even just for him. It's for the increasing number of people who have to argue that he's still a good football coach at the top of his game by using examples of League Cups that he's won.
I completely agree. Yeah, well, I completely
Your trophy
agree.
becomes a kind of sort of CV footnote.
It's like when he won the Europa League with Manchester United when they beat Ajax in that final. He did this bizarre little victory dance about how he'd nullified Ajax's threats. And you thought, you're the Manchester United coach. You are spending £200 million, £250 million every single summer,
and they're all
and you're
15.
lording it over. But back then, players like Matthias de Ligt and Frankie de Jong, they were so young.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they were 17, 18 years old.
Absolutely. You're looking at looking at a team that were relying on Kasper Dolberg's goals, and a couple of years later, Dolberg's playing for Nice. You're not playing for Real Madrid or Barcelona. So it's an interesting one. But it's also, there are other aspects of it which concern me. The football is incredibly negative. So the compromise the compensation that you're supposed to receive for Mourinho coaching a football team is that you acquire this incredibly pragmatic side that wins regardless. It has a solution for everything because he's such a brilliant mind, and when there's a problem in a game, he knows how to solve it. And I sat there at I'm going to call it White Hart Lane. I just can't. It's a habit. So hopefully Daniel Levy won't sue us. But I sat there and you're thinking, right, from minute 10 onwards, even before Willian scores what was an excellent goal, you saw the problems in midfield. You saw how Tottenham was struggling to exert any sort of press on Lampard's adapted back three / back five. You saw how Eric Dyer was struggling. You saw how Lucas Moura was having no effect on the game whatsoever. And everybody in the stadium, whether they are an Alex Stewart tactical mind type or just an average punter, knew you need someone that can pass a football in the middle of the pitch. Whether that's Lo Celso and on Dembele or an Eriksen, whatever. You cannot. This game is not going to go well if it carries on in this form. And there was no change. There was no early change. Even at halftime, when Eriksen comes onto the pitch, he comes on at the expense of Eric Dyer. So you still have the same problem. As you're thinking, right, so I've still got the negative football. I've still got the fullbacks and the centre halves going along at every opportunity. I've still got the slow pace of the football. And yet I'm not being compensated with anything which looks even remotely encouraging. Now, after the fact, there are a few things about that game which are slightly transcend anything to do with Jose Mourinho. Of course, the abuse Antonio Rudiger suffered, and Son Heung-min's red card changed the game as a contest. But that shouldn't disguise from the fact that the game was lost long before that happened. The game was lost as soon as the second goal went in, because even at 1-0 down, Tottenham weren't scoring. I mean, They had a couple of half chances, maybe in the first half, if you're being generous, but they produced nothing against a side who realistically are still very inexperienced, against a coach who has a season and a bit's worth of experience.
Totally beatable, basically.
Yeah. And you know what? Even in the aftermath, Lampard was extremely impressive. He's a very intelligent guy, probably more so than people realise. He's very, very smart.
He got a A-level in one of those things.
I used to do a pub quiz with him.
With Frank Lampard?
Not with him in my team. He used to come to he used to sporadically come to a pub quiz, which me and the woman that I was seeing at the time used to go to. Very long time ago. So it's sort of been about 10 years ago. And, people used to laugh at him, because, the footballer coming to the pub quiz. Because it was quite a challenging pub quiz. He always did very, very well. He's a very smart guy. But the point is that after the game, Mourinho defaults to his slightly snide personality where he accused Lampard of cloning Antonio Conte's system and using that as a sort of comfort blanket, which Lampard didn't like, tweaked him a little bit, and he started talking about, look at the players there. How many of them actually played for Conte? And so the Mourinho mask started to slip a little bit. And it's just it was just one of those days where you think it was coloured by the abuse suffered by Rudiger, because that's, as a fan of Tottenham, that was just an awful thing to witness, to be in a stadium when that was happening. It was, you just wanted to cringe into your seat. It was, it's just inexcusable. But you also, on reflection, even just from a footballing perspective, it's just a very discouraging day. It was another example to be used by people who think that Mourinho, as an ideologue, as a high priest of footballing, and not intelligentsia, but sort of footballing theory, is nowhere close to being at the top of the class.
Did it feel like a performance? Obviously, you lost. Did it feel like a performance towards the end? I mean, you describe it. So it's taking a long time to get this point out. You've described it to me like a performance at the end of a Mourinho cycle rather than at the beginning of one, where there's still the opportunity that fans afford Mourinho to sort of, to take his time, make his changes. He needs a transfer window, whatever. Before those performances kind of continue, and the response to them is just, right, well, this is...
No, I don't think I would say... I would start using the end of cycle description or any of those terms, because that usually comes replete with a few other things, some sort of social issues. Why it bothered me is because I was in his press conference at Molineux, and he talked about how happy he was that Tottenham were out of the League Cup because it meant that he could have 5 straight days on the training ground. And so you think, I left feeling encouraged. I thought, right, well, that's a bad performance. They got lucky. They scored a very fortunate late goal, so they've won. Brilliant. And so he presented it as this kind of, right, well, I'm going to go and tighten some bolts and, hammer in some loose nails. And, and in 5 days' time, you're going to see something which isn't necessarily perfect, because nobody could expect that at the moment. He hasn't been there long enough for that expectation to exist.
But it's the blueprint for the revolution.
Does it make sense? Can you, even if you don't like the style of football, does it make sense? Can you see the aims and the logic behind it? Can you see what a team is trying to do? And after 5 days on training ground with players that, it was a regression. And it was a regression exposed by what is a novice of a head coach. And that's very difficult to take as a Tottenham fan. And it's very difficult if you're being encouraged to leave your past issues with Jose Mourinho aside. It's very difficult to do that if then you throw in one of those. People who say, "Oh, he's only been there for a while." Yeah, that is absolutely for a short time. Absolutely true, but that doesn't mean that you have to forget the previous 15 years of what Jose Mourinho stood for in the European game, because that is his identity. You cannot do that. You do not get a sort of a clean slate every time you walk into a new club. In the same way that Guardiola doesn't. People haven't forgotten that he failed to win the European Cup at Bayern Munich. They haven't forgotten, prior to this summer, they didn't forget that Jurgen Klopp had lost European Cup finals, or that, his Borussia Dortmund side fell off a cliff immediately after their apex. It doesn't work like that.
I tell you what, the way I like to think about Mourinho is as a manager who's been around for a long time now. I mean, when did he take over at Porto?
Oof.
2002?
2002? Let me look it up.
Let's say, okay, we're basically, we're verging on 20 years as a top-level professional football manager. Now, and let's consider him, forget about football for a second, let's just consider him as the best, or, there or thereabouts at something at 2002. The best at something, right? Mm-hmm. Like Bob Dylan with songwriting, let's say. Bob Dylan is considered, the greatest songwriter of all time. In reality, Bob Dylan wrote incredible songs for about 10 years. And he's got some bangers, either side of those. In recent years, hey, he still sometimes comes out with a real rock and roll classic. And I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love it, Bob. But he really only was plugged into the fucking universe.
What is your favourite Dylan? Single, not album.
Oh.
I feel like you can judge somebody on that. It's a very revealing comment. That's a little Tifo interlude.
It's a very hard one to answer, though.
ISIS.
I love Desolation Row.
Depends which version of Desolation Row you hear, though. Because there are so many bootlegs out there.
Right.
Wonderful, amazing bit of songwriting. Absolutely. But
that whole, if you said album, that album.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Oh, anyway, the point
Don't
is
make that noise again.
Yeah, that was a weird noise. That was a weird noise. But that album and the subsequent before the 10-year period where he's plugged into the universe, he's riding along the ethereal wave of life.
It's Sick Boy's theory of life,
right?
From Trainspotting,
right?
You have it, and then you lose it.
And then you lose it. But they all say as well, the ones that aren't massive egoists, they all say that it's not them, that it's sort of coming through them, and they don't really know what's happening. I mean, the reality is, it is their subconscious jumbling stuff up and then spewing it out. But they don't really feel like they are in charge of the process. And then when it stops coming, it's like, it's just stopped. It's just you've stopped being the tool through which this amazing feat of creativity has occurred. Jose Mourinho has been a football manager for 18 years now, a top-level football manager for 18 years. Let's say from 2002 to 2012, he was maybe at the top of his game. And now, obviously, going to have those occasional hits. They're going to be there. We're going to click along from time to time. We're going to enjoy it because we're also a bit nostalgic. But it's never the same as it was. And anyone who says it's the same is a liar. And there are very few people who David Bowie maybe being one of them, who can just consistently keep it up. That's a very good shout. You get David Bowie, Alex Ferguson. There's really not that many people, whatever they're doing, who are doing it to the same highest possible standard their entire career.
Do you know what's interesting about Ferguson is that you're absolutely right. It's a perfect example. But what people miss about Ferguson is his thinking changed. Like, it wasn't Ferguson doing the same thing for all that time. It was the way he thought about the game adjusted. So he would occasionally have a season where you thought, this is the end for United. And then within about 12 months, he would sign a different type of player. One of the tells actually was he would appoint a different kind of assistant manager. So if you think about the sort of the Meulensteins, the Carlos Queiroses, Steve McLaren, he was open to adjusting his thinking. Now, I was having a conversation with someone the other day, journalist, and we were saying that that the way he reacts to players has changed. So in the beginning, Mourinho had this hold on footballers. And when you think of that, you think of players like Didier Drogba and John Terry and Frank Lampard and Peter Cech and, Ricardo Carvalho. Now, I think there's something in the idea that today's 23-year-old footballer is a different beast to what he was 15 years ago. I think the way they react to criticism is different. Financially, I think it's much for muchness. They are a bit wealthier, but they're still separated by society and from society in pretty much the same way. I think there is something to be written about how he deals with the millennial type and how he extracts potential from that kind of personality. I'm not a smart enough person to write that article myself.
I think this came up with Jack and Charlie, actually.
Okay.
Towards the end of the podcast, because we had a whole conversation about when millennial stops and when Gen Z starts.
Yeah, so I mean, my definition of millennial may be wrong here, but I'm thinking of, Yeah, you know what I mean by that
Yeah,
term.
yeah.
I think we are actually millennials.
Well, millennial, as I've subsequently found out, is anyone born between 1985 and 1997.
Okay, so I'm not actually a millennial. I'm 35. I was born in 1984.
So you're a Gen X.
Cool.
Yeah, pretty cool. Like an
guess.
X-Man,
I guess.
Ex Machina.
The X makes it sound cooler than it probably is. But
Yeah.
Anyway.
Not to your
So
wife.
I think there's something in that. I think there's something in, yes, his methodology, and he's tried to compensate for that by he has brought João Sacramento to Spurs from Lille, I think.
But what was he though? What he was to me, and I don't, I'm not the best placed person to say that this is true, but to me, he was always a motivator, someone who instinctively understood his players, who his players wanted to die for, and who was obviously, tactically accomplished as well. But the whole thing around him was like the cult of Mourinho.
It was a
We also know
package.
cults don't last that long either, do they?
No.
With the exception of, Christianity or any of the really long-living ones.
I want to be careful, and I'm not trying to say that that Mourinho, what Mourinho was illusory in any way at all. He was a fabulously successful coach and one of the very, very best of his generation. My point would simply be that he hasn't updated himself in a way that allows him to retain that primacy.
Because when your thing is being down with the kids, you can't update that as you get older.
Yeah, all of a sudden those kids are 40.
Yeah.
Frank Lampard is managing against him. He's not a midfielder anymore.
And he's chatting shit about him.
Yeah, well, Frank Lampard's actually, you would say, okay, so after at full time, Frank Lampard, all the Chelsea players gathered in the corner where the travelling supporters was, and Lampard was right in front of them. He was all over it. He was like watching a boxer at the end of a fight. And the crowd were loving it, and you looked also at players like Mason Mount and Tammy Abraham, the young, pliable types that
You owe it to him.
Right, so they have the relationship with Lampard that Mourinho used to have with players of Lampard's generation, and they are different. So the relationship is kind of the same, but the personalities within it are different.
Yeah.
And that's quite interesting because we need more time with Mourinho to judge what the effect is that he has on Tottenham's individual players. But I think that's quite an interesting subplot.
Yeah. In fact, this conversation that I had with Jack and Charlie in the podcast, you might be interested to go back and listen to it if you've missed it. But we then, they then went on to talk about him as a kind of usurper, as a sort of underdog mentality guy. With him and his merry band of fellows are going to stick it to the king because fuck the man, right? And that's Mourinho. We talked about him as a punk character. And it's difficult to be punk when you are establishment. We all know if you show up to a royal party with tartan trousers on, they don't let you in.
Yeah, well, he's now John Lydon, but during his selling butter phase.
Yeah, which is now, I think, still.
Yeah.
And hey, I love butter. Quick reminder to let everyone listening know that this episode is supported by The Athletic. You can get a 7-day free trial and 50% off an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.co.uk/Tifo. Also, what's new is that The Athletic have released a whole bunch of football podcasts, all of which are freely available to listen to. By the way, you needn't be a subscriber, although it helps to be, because listening to the podcasts on their app it's pretty great. Anyway, I'm going to tell you about 3 of them now. I've told you about a bunch already, but here's 3 more. The first one is 1874. The Athletic's Greg Evans joins Villa fan and broadcaster Dan Bardell to bring you the definitive word on Aston Villa Football Club every single week. Subscribe for big name interviews from inside the club, plus breaking news and opinionated comment. That's my favourite kind of comment, the opinionated kind. The second is The Red Agenda. The Athletic's James Pearce and Simon Hughes are alongside Steve Hothersall. I hope I said that right, Steve. To bring you the very best insight into Liverpool Football Club every week, plus big name guests and breaking news from the red half of Merseyside. And the third one is Pod and the Tyne. You know what they say about that. It's all mine. It's all mine. It's not all mine. It's freely available to listen to for you. Taylor Payne is joined by The Athletic's George Colkin and Chris Waugh to discuss the latest goings-on at St James's Park, including big-name guests and breaking news. Plus, they'll be sharing some of their favourite tales from one of England's most fascinating football clubs. There you go. There's loads more than that as well. There's like 11 or something at the moment, and they're all really interesting to listen to. 7-day free trial, 50% off an annual subscription to read what is probably the best football writing on the internet, 8p a day, www.theathletic.co.uk/Tifo. Thank you for listening, and back now to me and Seb. It is VAR.
Oh yeah,
I'm doing a robot voice because of VAR.
I would have got that.
Did
If
you get
I
it?
was actually muting some little prick on Twitter, but I would had I been paying proper
Wow,
attention.
that was really blue.
Yeah.
Because there was intent behind it. Who's the guy? Come on.
No, it wasn't being an offensive. I just like
Let's dox him right here,
so
right now.
anyone that writes, I can just about tolerate lol.
I write lol to you quite a lot in text messages.
Yeah, that's okay, but also like I feel there's a bit more give and take to our conversations.
It also means I'm actually saying lol.
Yeah, and I can kind of imagine you saying it, and you don't really laugh at anything because that's your personality.
I'm the funny guy.
You don't
I don't laugh at other people.
Well, you don't really see the humour in life. You're more of a you're more of a plodder, I'd say.
This is horrible. Move on from me.
You know, but when people sort of call back to predictions you've made and say "lol" with 9 O's, I just can't stand.
What
it.
was your prediction?
I don't even know. I just like there's a guy sort of. I think I wrote that I thought Leicester were going to do quite well at Manchester City.
Oh, lol.
And someone was like, "Lol, they lost." I was like,
They did lose though.
"They did, mate. Well
That's
done.
that's on you.
Good for you." No, I should. I will. Yeah. Anyway.
Look, this is boring. Tell me about VAR, because we talked about VAR at the beginning of the season, and we agreed then it's complicated and a bit stupid, and we're going to see how it works out. I feel like we've seen how it's worked out, and it doesn't really work consistently, does it?
I feel like one of the big problems is that VR has been implemented, even just in these 4 months, in several different ways without us knowing about it. I think we started the season with one version, and I think we're recording this on the 23rd of December. I think we now have a slightly different version.
Yeah.
And I think what has annoyed me is because I came away from Stockley Park quite positive. I was encouraged by the version that they were presenting. I feel like the version they presented is not what we now have.
What are the differences?
Okay, so back then, which was late July, they said, right, they were very, very clear. They said, we're going to, this is going to interfere as little as possible. They presented, their tenets were minimal interference. We're going to use it only to correct major decisions. We're also going to emphasize the importance of communicating properly with fans in the stadiums. We want to make sure there are as few delays as possible. Now, it's all subjective, but I would say that none of those things has happened.
It's not that subjective. I mean, I know what you mean by saying it's all subjective.
No, but people have different attitudes towards it.
They literally changed the way that they interact with fans in the stadium because it wasn't working. I understand, okay, maybe there's a little teething issues around it. The whole idea of only using it for major incidents in the first place was, we said at the time, a terrible idea. What is a major incident? It's not going to sit down well with anybody. You either institute it all or you don't have any of it. This is the grey area is the thing that kills it.
I tell you what's been most problematic for me, Joe, is that this idea that you can have, you can theoretically have a situation where a foul has taken place in the penalty box. Let's say it's a penalty incident. Now, a foul takes place and everybody who's ever watched a football game can see the incident and think, well, that's a penalty. But because it doesn't meet the grade of mistake, we have to pretend it didn't happen. And it's the fundamental contradiction at the heart of VAR and the flaw in its theory is that you cannot allow it to look like a shill for refereeing vanity, which at times it has done. I'm afraid it looks like it's the PGML, it's a fig leaf for referees that make too many mistakes. I mean, I remember there was an incident at White Hart Lane when Gerard Deulofeu got fouled in the box by Jan Vertonghen. It was Watford Spurs, and it's a penalty. It's inarguably a penalty. It is. There is no conversation which can convince me otherwise. And yet, because I forget who the referee was, but it was just like, well, no, that's not a bad enough mistake. It's almost the point where, like, at that stage of the season, it was like for VAR's interference involvement, you required a level of refereeing slapstick, almost in the kind of Graham Poll 3 yellow cards mold.
You needed a 12th player.
you needed a 12th player, or the ball had accidentally turned into a triangle, or someone had added an extra penalty box in the middle of the pitch or something. It's
someone opened the wormhole.
Fucking ludicrous.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're gonna have to bleep that, but
no, leave it. I think we'll leave that one because it is ludicrous.
And I think also is I spent a lot of time in different Premier League grounds and among different crowds, so I like to think this is a fairly broad sample. But I've been in stadiums where VAR has been used quite well and efficiently, and without it really interfering and without people knowing about it. But more often than not, I've experienced long checks where everybody, both sets of fans, irrespective of what the decision is or who it might benefit or punish, are just utterly hacked off with it. I was at Molineux about a month ago for Wolves against Sheffield United. Finished 1-1. I forget why, but there was a VAR check for I think a penalty at one point. I forget who in which box even. And both sets of fans just sang "fuck VAR" together, whilst the checking screen was being displayed on the big TV, the in stadium screen, and it's just like I haven't ever seen anything which has been so universally hated by everyone. It's extraordinary. It's a kind of
Nazis.
Well, in football. But
in football, sorry.
Nazis weren't. Yeah, I feel like we've gone to one of those.
People didn't like the Nazis.
They didn't quite justifiably, no.
Really true.
But it's a very strange phenomenon. Also, I want to point people in the direction of some of the things that Henry Winter has said and written about it, and specifically about Mike Riley. And I agree with Henry. I think.
Who's Mike Riley?
He's the head of. He is Mr. Referee.
He's Mr. Referee.
He's the head of the PGMOL,
right?
Professional Games and Match Officials Limited, and they are the body of referees.
The POGMOL,
if you like.
That's quite a good short
quite
name.
Clumsy little acronym, but yeah, okay.
The POGMOL.
The POGMOL. I mean, it's catchy.
Good.
Yeah, okay.
I like it.
It's become about them. It's not about football. As per the old maxim, like a good referee is one you don't notice. It's become completely the opposite. It's so vain, and it's also. I don't like the way in which I forget exactly when. I think it was about October, but very clearly there was an adjustment made to what is defined as clear and obvious. Clear as day. I don't think anyone could possibly argue about that, and yet that hasn't been communicated. They haven't said. There isn't the sort of the humility within the organisation to say, look, this is a difficult process. It's trial and error. People wouldn't have endless tolerance for that either, but it would help. Instead, it's just this sort of make believe where, oh no, this is just how we do it. And so people, when that happens, people don't really understand the criteria anymore. People don't have any confidence in the system. And the hatred for it grows. It has no credibility.
It's a bit like, I know it's not the rules, but it's a bit like going to watch a game of football and not really understanding what the rules are.
I don't know what really constitutes handball anymore.
No, nor do I.
Well, I don't understand what constitutes, like, I see a handball, but it seems like, right, so if in deflecting a shot, the ball hit a player's knee, followed by his, left testicle, right. And then
there was the Fred one. Do you remember the Fred one where there was a big discussion around it because he was sliding into block.
Yeah,
his arms were by his side.
Yes, I do remember the one.
And at the last moment, he puts his arm down to break his fall.
Yeah, and it hits
which is. I think you or I might have been Alex on the podcast described
it wasn't me, but I know the incident. I can't remember in which game it was. It was the Manchester City game.
I can't remember. It was contentious enough to be
yes.
I think it was Alex then on the podcast who described it as the most natural body position anyone could ever make.
Yeah.
And there was a big discussion around it because not necessarily directly as a result of VAR, but partly as a result of VAR, partly as a result of the changing rules around what constitutes a handball. People really don't understand. That is the first consequence of it. The second is that means that everything is up for discussion. So in a way, VAR was sold as this end to the monotonous pub conversation around whether something was or wasn't a penalty, which even Match of the Day, to their credit, have moved away from doing over the last couple of seasons, because fuck me,
People
it
are
is just
so bored of it.
It's so boring. It doesn't matter. Have your little argument about it at the time, whatever. Just move on. But VAR was sold on the basis that it would remove the necessity to have that conversation. And it has done the opposite of that, and it has made the conversation more confusing, and no one in the conversation has solid footing because they don't understand the rules, and it seems that the referees don't really understand the rules or are changing them as they go, as it relates to VAR.
So on the day that we went for our presentation, I was in a group with a few fans, also with Nick Miller, who's been on our pod before, good man, and the people. It was a joint presentation between PGML, Pogmol, and the Premier League, and they were so smug. They were so condescending because some of the fans abused that day, and they used it as an opportunity to try and review every decision which has gone against them in their club's history. And that was a bit tedious, accept that. There were questions from other fans. There was a lady from Norwich there. There were a couple of people from Fulham. There were a few representatives from, I think, somewhere else. But people were sort of had legitimate concerns about the dynamics of it. Not, is my team going to get more penalties, but sort of, how's that going to work? And how are you actually going to do that? And they were so patronising. They talked down to everybody. And it was, I don't know if it was just my group, but...
They're referees.
They weren't referees, they were administrators.
Okay.
So there was one guy from the Premier League who treated us as if we were sort of 9-year-old children. Wonder how he's doing at the moment. And then there was another guy who was nicer, but also quite smug. And you just think, looking back, it's not something I really appreciated at the time. I thought they were just, at the time I read it as a kind of, God, they've probably been through this quite a lot and they're probably bored of it. Now I look back and I think, you haven't thought about this enough. Like this is a very Premier League-ish action. This is a kind of, we know best. This is how we'll do it. And it is just nonsense. It is the worst. I mean, and this is coming from someone who wanted it originally a few years ago, who was encouraged by what I was told over the summer. And now I've seen it in practice. I probably covered, I've been in person to maybe 20, 25 games this season. I feel that's fair. Like, it's just chaos.
So this is your halfway season verdict. Bad.
Absolutely. And I'm not covering the same team. I go all around the league. Different parts of the country. I see a few teams more than others, but generally I get across all of them. And from a neutral's perspective, from an in-stadium perspective, awful. Absolutely awful.
So would you just can it at this point?
In the hole that I put an axe through it. Because
that's good. Could be the brave thing to do.
You can't. They just don't know how to do it properly. Like they don't. I don't know what the error in the mechanism is, but they can't deliver it properly. The people running it and the people making decisions based off it are not being bound by any kind of consistency. It hasn't been communicated to the fans properly in the stadium. The delays are too much. The whole idea of trying to find, trying to judge offsides by the width of an armpit, I can't get on board with it because it just feels like we're going to a place where it's not fun anymore. And that is, like, I know it's tribal and it's important and, life and death and, all that stuff, but also football is entertainment. It's fun. You're supposed to be invested in it. And now we're in a situation where, like, it feels like every goal that's scored, there is somebody behind a computer screen trying to find a reason to disallow it. And I hate it. Absolutely hate it.
Right, there we go. Well, that's the Tifo verdict on VAR. Anyway, next up, and lastly, Adam Crafton's signings of the decade. It's a handy time for me to remind you that for a 7-day free trial and for 50% off an annual subscription, you can visit theathletic.co.uk/Tifo and get all of those things that I just said. It's the best place to read about football online. It truly is. And one of the articles that The Athletic has released in recent weeks is Adam Crafton's signings of the decade. It's quite an interesting concept, this. We did something similar during the World Cup in Russia, where we tried to build a team that would work as a team with maximum, I think, one player per team, per country.
Yeah.
Adam Crafton's one is nice because he's not just done the players of the decade thing. He's gone for signings of the decade. He's gone for signings. I think his methodology was to go not just for obviously the best players, but for the best signings. Like minimal expense, maximum output, maximum return if they are sold. Or players that have surprised and the likes of it. And the list of names that he has...
Got it in front of me.
You've got it in front of you. Will you tell me what they are?
Yeah, so David De Gea in goal. Centre-back, Harry Maguire, Virgil van Dijk. Cesar Azpilicueta as a right-back. Andy Robertson as a left-back.
Yes, please. Very cheap.
He's got a pivot of Fernandinho and N'Golo Kante in central midfield. A band of three behind his forward of Philip Coutinho, David Silva, Eden Hazard, and Sergio Aguero up front.
N'Golo Kante has got to be player of the decade, right? In the Premier League.
He's phenomenal.
I mean,
I still think he's underappreciated. I think that sort of, you still hear people talking about, he's a ball winner. Like you got no idea, man. Like he's an incredibly complete footballer. I know he's not a great finisher, but as a box to box player, there's nothing between the two penalty boxes that he can't do. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Have you got some names you want to add? I mean, you misunderstood this initially, didn't you?
So I thought it was been clever. I woke up this morning and came up with not a very long list, but quite a long list of names until I realised, of course, that the decade actually began in 2010. Hey, you know what? I'm a day away from a bit of time off. Like I'm allowed that kind of.
Well, give us the names anyway, even if they're not from the decade, because I like the ones you read out to me already.
Okay, let me get my list out. Goalkeeper, my ineligible goalkeeper was Brad Friedel,
who I loved.
I thought his deal to Villa was great. His deal to Tottenham was brilliant. Like he became he started to get a little bit glued to his line by towards the end of his career.
Right.
He didn't always come for crosses, and he had some bad moments, but a great goalkeeper for a very long time.
Do you know that I once wrote a short film about Brad Friedel?
Tell me the premise.
It was called Friedel and Me. This is true. And it was about a fan who was obsessed with Brad Friedel.
Was the fan you?
No, it wasn't me. It was a fiction. To quite an unhealthy, and the implication might be, or the inference might be, sexual urges towards Brad Friedel. And I spent a long time trying to convince my housemate at the time.
That should have been a Netflix series.
To star in it as the main character in Friedel and Me.
So, okay, yeah. I can't.
It's a short film, so it's only 5 minutes. It was only supposed to be 5 or 10 minutes long. But basically, the character was obsessed with Brad Friedel. He was a little bit ashamed of it, so he kind of hid it, but he wore a Brad Friedel shirt, which was a little bit too small for him.
He was only a little bit ashamed of it.
He was only a little bit ashamed of it. He would go to the games quite often. He would wait outside the stadium to see if Brad Friedel would come out the players' exit. Once or twice he would try and shout over to him. Brad Friedel would obviously be a little bit wary towards this is a strange relationship. And the main character would hire a sex worker to pretend to be Brad Friedel, and for an enjoyable, passionate night of sex.
Hey, if you want to sponsor this podcast, I believe that there are still opportunities going.
It was not. It wasn't dirty. It wasn't. The sex wasn't in the film. But it was about the mind of someone who was obsessed with Brad Friedel. Friedel and Me.
I'd say that sort of the real worry is about the mind of someone that constructed that. Like the character with the obsession with Brad Friedel. Look, people have funny things.
People have funny turns.
They have strange kings. But people who create that kind of stuff, that's a different category of person.
Who's next on your list?
Okay, so I've got I wheeled out an old chestnut, Michu.
Did I tell you that I wrote a short film about him? No, I didn't.
That's slightly...
I didn't, but I loved Michu as well.
What a good play.
Oh my, I forgot about him until you mentioned him earlier.
The thing that annoys me about Michu is people present him as a complete anomaly, whereas his career was really sabotaged by injury towards the end. He was just legitimately a really good player, really fun to watch, and a really good attitude for the game as well.
You know what? We were talking before the podcast about what our sort of defining era of football was. And the name that came to my mind was Gabby Agbonlahor. I remember him for some reason as being the pervasive presence in football at the time. Michu is dead centre in the middle of what I would consider to be my football years, working in a pub, watching that every day. Michu, He was a big part of my year.
Well, mine too. Like Michu sort of rose to prominence when I first started really writing about football. Like
Right.
I did other jobs for most of my 20s, but yeah, he was kind of he was a big personality within the Premier League as I kind of tried to break through. So I've got him. He is eligible. Kyle Walker is not, but I put him on because
Kyle Walker?
yeah,
You
so
could
his
have
move
his
from
signing to
Sheffield
City.
United to Tottenham.
Right.
Not Spurs to City. Because when he was signed actually as part of a deal with Kyle Norton. And Norton was thought to be the bigger prospect at the time.
Right.
And Walker became a phenomenal player and was obviously sold for £50 million. But not allowed under the terms set out by Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Or the rules of what constitutes a decade is probably a better way of putting it.
I mean, that's the real thing. It's not Adam's fault.
I put João Moutinho in.
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't know who I would. I obviously wouldn't put him in to replace Kante, but if you forget about what he is as a player and the minimal fee, but if you think about what Wolves have quickly become, obviously most people sort of are more inclined to celebrate Ruben Neves, and he's a brilliant player. I tell you, I'd probably argue that João Moutinho is among the very best players to ever play for Wolves. Certainly in the current generation. Like obviously, the further you go back, the more competitive that list becomes. But Moutinho is just, even now, like deep into his 30s, he is just a fabulous player to watch, and he gives Wolves an authority and a gravitas that they wouldn't have without him. And so, economically, I mean, I've obviously paid attention to what Adam's done with, with finances and stuff in his list and the reasons he's used behind some of his picks. Moutinho is up there. I would put Sadio Mane in there because, and he does count because...
To Southampton?
No, to Liverpool.
Okay.
Because of how much it cost and because originally, I think Brendan Rodgers declined the opportunity to sign Sadio Mane when the transfer committee, which included Michael Edwards, but wasn't led by him, recommended him when Mane was at Salzburg. And then Mane obviously moves to Southampton and becomes, sorry, my phone went off, and develops a reputation. But he only cost £30 million. Now, I want him on this list because I think about what it would cost to sign him now and how well he is suited Klopp's football. Yeah, he is Liverpool's best attacking player. Like I understand the argument for Mohamed Salah. Sadio Mane is a much better player than Mohamed Salah. He doesn't get the kind of press maybe, but I think as an all-round entity, as a footballer and as a spectacle, like there's no contest. Mane's better. And I just think the whole thing is just, if you went onto the open market now, 150, 200 million pounds.
Crikey.
Yeah.
Okay. You got anyone else?
I do not.
Should I give you mine?
Yeah, I'm interested.
I haven't got a team. What I've got is a new one, and it's called Most Underrated Player of the Decade.
So what you've done is I've
changed the rules completely. Yeah, it's because I'm in charge of the process.
Okay, go on then.
I think this is a good one.
Yeah.
It's also my best player of the decade,
yeah.
But it's the main one. Is most underrated player.
If you say
decade.
Wes Hoolahan, I'm just going to walk.
Not going to say Wes Hoolahan. I'm going to say Robbie Brady. Because Robbie Brady,
I felt like we were beyond this.
No.
We've talked. We were doing this when this was still Umaxer.
Listen, Robbie Brady.
Yeah.
Is honestly, it is underrated by you, and I'd say by most other people.
Your face has gone so serious.
Most other people, but that player is very good. He's a very good footballer. Great dead ball. Great charging along the wing. Very strong. Very fast. Has a good accuracy with his shot. I'm just saying. He's a better player than most people think he is.
I could draw a fairly straight line between your relationship with Robbie Brady and that Brad Friedel. I could.
I have thought at times about buying a Robbie
people
Brady
watching
t-shirt.
and listening, you don't know Joe, but I've known him probably, it's been like maybe 5 years now, and this has been fairly consistent. This is Don't look into the camera when you do that. Nobody wins.
Listen, I just love that guy.
I know that you do.
I think he doesn't get enough credit.
I know.
And I'd love to hear you credit him.
I think he's a good player. But really, that's your most underrated player ever? Because you've taken the decade
Of the
out
decade.
of it. Okay, but you said ever.
Did I say ever?
Yes.
I didn't mean ever.
Okay.
That's insane. I meant of the decade.
Is there anyone on the list that is not Robbie Brady?
No, it's a list of one.
Just Robbie Brady. So that wasn't even a list. That was just you wanted to talk about Robbie Brady for a bit.
No, it's not a list. It's just he's the most underrated player of the decade. I challenge anyone to suggest a player that is more underrated than Robbie Brady of the decade. You will struggle. There aren't that many because, okay, in all seriousness, sure, it's Robbie Brady, but he is pretty high up there in terms of underrated players. He was always, even when he was at Hull, when he was at Norwich, he was always the game changer on the pitch. He could always score a goal out of nowhere. He was always better than the players around him. For some reason, he couldn't make it work at bigger clubs. But there's just something about him.
Am I limited to the Premier League for this?
Yep.
So it's not. It's just English football.
Yep.
Okay. It's not a bad shout.
It's hard, see?
It is hard, but it's only hard because you don't really know what people rate.
You could say someone like Jamie Vardy.
No, because I don't think he's underrated.
I think he's still underrated.
I mean, I don't know. It goes back to what we said earlier. I think that he does this. He does one thing really, really, really well, and I think everyone's really, really appreciates what that is. But I don't know whether that makes him underrated. I would say that you could make a case for a couple of Burnley players. Someone like Ashley Barnes is underrated.
Yeah.
You know, people think of him as just a sort of a lump. Well, go back and look at his goals.
Uninjured Danny Ings.
Uninjured Danny Ings was a very, very good player. I say there's a couple of players at Bournemouth who are very, very underrated. I think Josh King is extremely underrated.
Yeah. Didn't Josh King also come from Man United's academy?
Yeah, via Blackburn.
Right, okay.
I think he went off there for a little bit. But yeah, he was originally at Man United.
Yeah.
Very, very good player. Maybe not in Robbie Brady territory, but still.
See, it's hard. It's hard.
Hey, I tell you who looks very underrated now, Dusan Tadic.
Right, yeah, but he's not in the Premier League anymore.
No, but he was a very underrated Premier League player.
Was he?
Well, he went
I don't know if he was underrated when he was in the Premier League.
Well, evidently so. He was underrated by his club. I mean, they sold him for a cheap fee back to the Eredivisie, and he was on the Ballon d'Or long list, which is an incredible thing to say, actually. But
Dusan Tadic,
yeah.
Ballon d'Or.
Yeah.
Right. Well, look, I've given you 5 minutes there, and you can't think of anyone who's
I feel like whilst I was actually creating
an outright
hang on.
easy name to suggest, like an easy win.
This is nothing but a dirty lawyer's trick, because whilst I was within the boundaries of the assignment here, trying to create my own little list of...
You're a football journalist. You've already been to 25 stadiums this year.
25 games.
25 games this year.
Yeah.
You can't, off the top of your head, in 5 minutes, come up with a name over the last 10 years in the Premier League of a player who is more underrated than Robbie Brady.
Yeah.
You see, you mock.
It's not the player I struggle with. It's the concept of what is underrated.
What about Charles Nzobia?
No.
He was great.
Wrong decade.
No, it wasn't. Was it really?
Yeah.
God, that makes me feel really old now.
He played in this decade, but he began before.
When did he score those 3 goals?
I would argue I could make a case for Moussa Dembele being underrated, because I feel like people who didn't get the chance to watch him in person don't really know what he was and what a spectacle of a footballer he was.
Not as much as Robbie Brady. Right, that's the end now. And
I'll
welcome comments.
It's creepy because your eyes your eyes go to this weird little place when you talk about Robbie Brady.
I'll welcome comments.
I don't think you should welcome comments.
No, you should. If you can think of a player,
I think you should turn comments off for this podcast. You don't welcome comments about this.
If you can think of a player who is more underrated than Robbie Brady in the last 10 years of the Premier League, just leave us a comment. Anyway, listen, one more thing before you go. Your favourite video? I mean, it's of the decade. We weren't going in 2009. So what is your favourite video, Tifo video, basically?
One of the most interesting, I think, is Ewan McTears on why Barcelona can't fill Camp Nou.
That's also our biggest video.
It is, but I think it deserves to be, because it's very, very interesting. I was actually, we rewatched it this morning, and I had a little dig around for Barcelona's attendance statistics, and it's getting worse. So it was not only very interesting, but it's also very pertinent. And Barcelona have early in the year, they announced a delay to their renovation project. So It's going to become relevant. It's going to continue to be relevant for a few years yet. I think it won't be complete until 2024.
Right.
When it will, basically going to change the shell of the stadium
Really?
to make it. Yeah, it's very interesting. People haven't seen. Go and look at some of the concepts. Very interesting.
Do you know what mine is? Mine is...
Is it Alex Roseback?
No, that's the one that Seb wrote, which really didn't do very well.
No one watched.
No one watched that one. You should go and find it. Mine is James Montague's script on when Iraq won the Asian...
it's brilliant.
The AFC in 2007. Oh, I love it.
I would actually... there are a couple that were in this conversation because we've done a few different things with some very talented illustrators recently about stories. So if you can find the one about the Stasi in East Germany, I think that's brilliant. I know it's not ever going to be hugely popular, but it's a brilliant script, brilliantly illustrated.
That was an athletic script.
It is. It's written by Rafa Honigstein. It's really good. But some of those things, some of the story about the refugee who comes to England to watch Arsenal.
Yeah.
I can't remember how we titled that one, but
can't remember either.
I really enjoyed that.
Sam France did a good one on John Thompson.
Yes, he did. Very sad story.
It's a very boring name of a person, John Thompson. No offense to any Johns or any Thompsons, but the name, hides a very interesting story.
It's a very sad story too, for not just John Thompson and his family, but the people affected by the incident. But yeah, do find that one. And it's Thompson without a P if you're trying to Google it.
Yeah. All right, that's the end now. So thanks for listening, and hope you've all had a merry holiday time and enjoy a new year that is new and a year.
Traditionally, you just go with Happy Christmas.
Goodbye.